Hello, this is Jessica Segraves, and I did gene pollution and food contamination for my PowerPoint for Module 4 here. So what is gene pollution? So gene pollution, first off we want to probably talk about genetics and what genetics is, what a gene is. So genetics is the study of how living things receive common traits from previous traits. So when they're carried by a molecule called DNA, genes can present in a phenotypic way that are expressed in physical traits, and then sometimes genes are also expressed in other ways, such as the genotypic traits that we cannot see with our eyes, but they're detectable through studying genetics. So this PowerPoint slide is about gene pollution. So what is gene pollution? When genetic information is transferred into another organism where it wasn't necessary or it hadn't existed before. And gene pollution can be helpful and harmful to plants and animals alike. Farmers often use gene pollution and genetic engineering on crops to create new species that will go on to have GMO genes or genetically modified genes, such as insecticides. And having these plants have the insecticides makes them more resistant to pests or insects, and also cuts down on the farmer's use of pesticides, which are toxins, to humans, so that can be helpful to us whenever we do use GMO plants. So they do have some benefits. When GMO'd plants are allowed to breed with organisms that are not meant to have natural or organic genes, gene pollution can occur. So basically, taking something that's natural, such as a natural plant that has been growing, and then we have another plant with a GMO or another gene placed into it, and that can be via a bacteria, a virus, and we mix those together, then gene pollution does occur. Some ecological problems can arise from gene pollution, including contamination of nature, contamination of food, and microorganism pollution. And food contamination is what I'll be talking about, as it's worrisome as it enters the human and the animal populations on Earth, because as humans we do consume animals who might eat this as well. And we call these biotech crops. And these biotech crops are going to be our GMO products and where those are grown. And the kind of crops that can have these GMO products are going to be primarily corn, soybeans, cotton, and canola oils. And they're going to have the genes that have been manipulated to express specific traits. And they most commonly contain herbicides as well that have been injected into them. And so this chart over here in figure 1, we can see that maize accounts for 30%, soybeans at 78%, and this chart is pretty good at telling you what percent of each crop is going to be introduced into the world. And in 2018, the 22nd year of commercialization of biotech crops, 191.7 million hectares of biotech crops were planted by up to 17 million farmers in 26 countries. So that's a lot. Hectares is quite a bit. So most of the adopted crops, they were maize in 2018, as we can see from figure 1. So genetic engineered crops can cross the non-genetic crops more easily if two species are grown nearby. So just having them kind of out in the open growing without any type of protection can definitely create some problems and contamination into the environment that is around them. And how does this happen? So there's a couple things that can happen. So bees, they carry pollination. So of course they can carry pollination from these GMO crops into crops that are non-GMO'd, and so we can get contamination by that. We can also get contamination from wind. So definitely out here in Oklahoma, it's super windy. That will carry pollen of the GMO plants to other plants that are not, and hybrid plants can occur. And this can be, a problem, especially if you're talking about plants that have high levels of weed resistance, and then they become a nuisance, and then it's very hard for them to be killed or taken out. And then number 3 there, farmers create the seeds with the genes they want and then plant them in the ground on their farms, so they can choose what seed they want to buy. But even though the GE crop seeds have only been sold to farmers for less than 2 decades, evidence in my research has shown that the rise of these GMO plants and hybrids are climbing because the farmers aren't always going by guidelines to reduce the risk of contamination. So, and then number 4, contamination of farming equipment, because they are also not thoroughly cleaning their equipment in between their crop planting, which can be beneficial if they did do that. So what are 3 solutions to reduce food contamination? Number 1, growing plants and crops in a greenhouse. So maybe if you have it contained, I feel like the bees couldn't get to it, the wind couldn't get to it, and it could be in a more controlled environment. Number 2, restrictions on genetically modified organisms, because right now the FDA does not have to label them. They don't feel that they're a nuisance or bad. And number 3, cleaning farm equipment in between uses of other crops. So the growing crops in a greenhouse, some pros, of course, that I found for it is going to be that the bees and the wind can't get to it, and some disadvantage that I did find about it is that the space would be limited for the crop. Obviously we can't have giant greenhouses out there. I mean, there are some large commercial ones, but just having it be so big would not be a feasible solution for the area. And keeping the right temperature would also be an issue for the bigger space. As warmer weather approaches, it could trap the heat in and cook the plants. So you'd have to put a unit in there, or an AC unit, and I feel like the cost of electricity to do that would probably be pretty high. So I don't know how feasible, containing these GMO crops, food crops would be. The second thing, restrictions on GMOs. So like I said earlier, right now the United States does not have any federal legislation that is specific to GMO plants, especially on our food plants, which I find interesting. And also, if you go to the grocery store, they do not have to put labels on them that they are or contain GMO type products, which I find interesting as well. So I think placing more restrictions on farmers, what they can buy, where they can grow these seeds, how they grow these seeds, I think putting more restrictions on them would be, probably something they should look at. Some disadvantages to not having restrictions, I mean, obviously, is that people don't know what they're putting into their bodies. And I did find some research on mice research where they fed a mouse only GMO type products, and they were more prone to tumors, and they had an early death rate as well. So I found that interesting. So just the fact that the FDA has no GMO labeling is quite shocking, that I did find. So just placing more restrictions on them, I think, could be helpful. And that third one was cleaning the farm equipment. So everyone has a role in keeping food safe, starting with the farmer and ending with the consumer. So there's multiple ways they can do that, but cleaning their farm equipment is got to be helpful for preventing cross-contamination of plants and crops. Some of the health risks pertinent to unapproved GMO or GMFs are antibiotic resistance, things that contain allergies, nutritional changes, and the formation of toxins. So it's important that they keep these contained in an area and not having them contaminated by other crops that farmers may have, especially if they have herbicide type plants or just something else that would be very toxic for a human to consume. The best approach out of all 3 of these, I would say, would have to be the greenhouse. One, I know you can't have a large greenhouse, but just having those hybrid food crops contained and preventing them from spreading everywhere, I feel like is the best approach, and just keeping a control on it all. And of course, through our module 4 here, all those situations are great, but prevention is key, and just maybe not even taking the chance of having the cross-contamination of the GMO plants to non-GMO plants happening, or have gene pollution happening would, just be the best thing. There is a website I found here at the bottom that you can go to. It's justlabelit.org, and anyone can go on there and sign a petition to the FDA, in hopes that one day they'll have us labeling, have them labeling all the food when we go to our local Walmart and just anywhere, so that we know what we're consuming, and we know what foods contain GMO products and what foods don't. So thank you very much.